right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeffrey Mullen. I'll be acting as the chairman of the Milton Board of Appeals hearing tonight. With me tonight is Virginia Donahue King to my left and Francis O'Brien to my right, both members of the board. Tonight we'll be having two hearings. The first one is a hearing at 7:30 upon the application of Edward and Ann Marie Barker. Perhaps the applicants could approach and take their seat. Dated November 23rd, 2016. Good evening.
Good evening to you guys.
Let me just read the ad, and then we'll ask you to make your presentation. On file with the board for variances from the terms of 4C1 of the zoning bylaw, the applicants propose to build an 8-foot by 6-foot by 1-story addition to the right side of the single-family home at 73 Brook Hill Road, Milton. Section 4C1, side yards, requires that new buildings or new portions of buildings be set back a minimum distance of 12 feet from the side property and 24 feet from any other building on an adjacent lot. The applicant proposes that this addition be 8.9 feet from the right side lot line and 17.9 feet from the attached garage of the adjacent home. The property is located in a Residence B zoning district. All are set forth in the application and are on file with the board and open to public inspection. I have in the application file the application to the board by Mr. and Mrs. Barker. I have a letter from Mr. Prondak to Mr. and Mrs. Barker which summarize the denial of the building permit application and the outline of relief as I set forth in the ad. I've got a set of drawings showing a plot plan of 73 Brook Hill Road that were prepared by Donald G. Rosa, professional land surveyor. They're in multiple sheets, also showing renderings of the property that we can review with the hearing. And I've got the various notice materials that Mrs. Fitzgerald has put together. So that consists of the file that the board has. As I said, my name is Jeff Mullen. I'll be acting as the chairman. I see Mrs. Barker is here. Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you.
How can we help you tonight?
So yes, I'd hope here because I'd like you to review our appeal. You've got. Do you need?
So why don't you tell us who you are and where you live?
So I'm Anna Barker. I'm also known as Anna Rostron, which is my maiden name. My husband and myself, we've lived at 73 Brook Hill Road for 8 years now. We've done numerous developments and updates to our property throughout the time that we've lived there, increasing the property value and the appeal of the house from the road. And this that we are hoping to move ahead with is another thing that we're, addition that we're wanting to do to our house to improve our lives, I guess. As our children get older, the proposed area is an extended butler's pantry. With 2 young boys, I'm finding that any extra space would be great. We have spoke to our neighbours and we have shown them the documents that you guys, I believe, have in front of you. I have copies, the original copies of the letters that they've signed. Now, these are the three main neighbours who live adjacent to us, either side of us and opposite us. Mr. Keenan is the one whose property is next door and is also, against regulation being too close to our property. And you'll see that he is one of the people who have signed the document. And he has seen the drawings and we've talked in depth about what we are hoping to do.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Additionally, I took some photographs today of the area just to show you some more of the outside views. I don't know if you were given photographs. No. So, this is a couple that our builder did, and then there's a couple that I just took.
Okay. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your home and what the improvements will do to your home? So, I know you've described it generally, but
Right.
what is it exactly you're trying to accomplish?
Well, in the area, the area that we're hoping to extend was a side entrance to our home. When we moved in, we stopped using it as a side entrance because we did a double deck out the back and made an access point down to our yard that way, and it became a pantry area. The previous owners, I believe, used it as a side entrance, had a fridge there, and it was just a general area. So since we've used it as that, the stairs were beyond. There was stairs coming from the door down out, you know, to complete the access. Those stairs were unfit to walk upon, so we, you know, tore those down right away to stop the kids playing on it. And you can see from the photographs there that the door is still there. The addition that we're hoping to do is to get rid of that door and then just do the 6 foot by 8 foot extension. There is an overhang of the roof already there. Where that overhang finished, if you come down to floor level, that was where the platform was, where the beginning of the staircase was. You can see that from the side elevation and also from the photographs. It shows where the banister started. That staircase came down actually in front of the basement windows, and again on one of the photographs you can see that there's a stone put into the ground, and that's where the staircase finished. Our extension, hopefully, well, if you guys approve it, would fit into that slot. So it would actually become slightly less out than the staircase was. The roof extension that's already there, the overhang, would become part of the addition, and we would just come up to the second kitchen window. We're hoping to do this to get another dishwasher and sink and more storage in the house.
Okay, and on the interior, it will be a pantry. Will it connect directly to the kitchen?
Yes, in the kitchen at the moment we have a very open plan kitchen that we did when we moved in. Everything has been modernised, new, high quality, and then at the end of the kitchen you walk into this pantry area at the moment. So we would just continue that through. Literally the interior of it would just be an extended countertop with an L shape at the end, which is where the sink and the dishwasher would go.
And how will you, I know you don't use the side door. Is there a rear door?
Yes, there is, yeah. So we have the front door of the house, and if you walk straight through, in the kitchen there's 12-foot sliders that open up onto the deck. From that deck there is an access down to the exit. We also have basement access to the exit too, so it's really a redundant door that we've never used.
There's a lot slopes backward, down?
Yes, it drops, yeah.
Okay, let me just catch everybody up. So, Mrs. Barker has given us 3 letters. I'm going to read them
Sure.
because they're all the same letter. By way of this letter, I acknowledge reviewing the planned extension drawings for the above-mentioned properties. We have no objection regarding this proposal or the build of the extended pantry. It can add value to the property, the neighborhood real estate prices, and general upkeep of the area. So that was written by Robert Keenan at 79 Brook Hill, Peter Keenan at 65 Brook Hill, and Dylan Sanders at 76 Brook Hill. So those are the, I think you indicated, the immediate abutters on both the left and the right, and the third person is the person directly across the street?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So when you do this improvement, you're going to repaint the whole house?
We'll just paint that section. We've already repainted and re-sided most of the house in our updates that we've done over the last few years.
When you finish with the improvements, will the house appear uniform in color?
Exactly, yeah.
And it will look as if
Yep.
it was an original component?
Yes, that's very important to us. All the updates we've done have been with the utmost of care to keep to the original architecture of the building.
What about the treatment of the foundation? How is this going to be supported?
They plan to do, and I think it's shown on the drawings here, a column, a below-level concrete column that comes down, and it will be supported. It'll have posts coming up from it. So, and then my builder couldn't make it tonight because he's had another appeals thing for a different client. But they plan to do a 6-foot deep concrete support that goes down into the ground, and then that will come up. And then literally the extension, we're going to leave it open so that the basement windows aren't affected.
I see.
And literally it's going to just be an extended box onto where we are, just to try and keep it as clean, simple as possible,
Okay.
not affecting the exterior view of the house.
Okay. Let me ask, are you finished with your presentation?
Sure. The last thing I just think is important to note is that Peter, his house, and that I wanted to show you the pictures of it next door. Both of us.
Peter at 65.
Peter Keenan.
Peter,
Yes. I don't know. Which
okay.
one. That's a negative side of his house too. So he's the building that you see is a triple garage of his.
Right.
So I think that it does have some foundation. It's not, I wouldn't propose to do something that his bedroom window or living room looked out onto.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask my colleagues if they have any questions to the applicant. Mr. O'Brien. Mrs. King, no questions. Have you finished with your testimony?
I have, thank
Okay,
you.
let me ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in support of the application. Let me ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in opposition to the application. I see Mr. Corcoran. Mr. Corcoran,
I'd actually like to speak in favor. I'm a neighbor,
I know that.
although I wasn't aware
Hi.
of what's being proposed. I'm familiar with the work that they've done with the
Maybe you could
house.
introduce
Sure,
yourself
I'm
and explain to us where you live.
My name is Edward Corcoran. I live at 70 Morton Road, which is the next street over from Brook Hill Road. I'm very familiar with the house and the work that they've done to date. I think what they've done is appropriate, and I think what they're proposing to do here is also appropriate, so I'd encourage the board to vote in favor.
So noted. Thank you, Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that wants to be heard at the hearing? Okay, with that, no further questions?
No.
So I think we should close the testimony, and we'll begin the deliberative process. So,
Okay.
hearing no further questions, let me ask my colleagues if they would like to speak about the application. Mrs. King first.
Sure. It's really quite a small variance that is being asked for. Really taking up less space perhaps than what had been there before the steps came down. It will add to the neighborhood, it will add to the house. And it doesn't encroach any further than it already has been, so I would be in favor of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. King. Mr. O'Brien.
Probably one of the best presentations I've seen.
In the 20 years that he's been on the
A
Board of Appeals, that's
homeowner,
saying something.
Great plans. You've obviously put a lot of thought into this. You didn't need your builder here because you could probably build it yourself from what I could hear.
Save their money.
It's also pretty consistent with the type of relief that we have given many times before relative to similar encroachments, which I think is fairly de minimis. So with that, I'd be prepared to support it.
I agree. I
Thank you
think,
very much.
I think Mr. Corcoran put you over the top. I'll say that. There's nothing that substantively that I can add. I think it's terrific and a great addition to your home, and we're well done. And as Mrs. King said, very modest. So the only point that I'll make is I'd vote in favor with the understanding that the conditions about which we spoke at the meeting, meaning that it will be uniform with the balance of the property and that the foundation will be exposed the way that you presented it and tie it into these drawings that you've given us so that it's reasonably accurate with that. With that said, I'll vote in favor and ask my colleagues to take a vote.
Aye.
Okay, you unanimously have your variance. Congratulations.
Thank you
Very
very
well
much.
done.
And I appreciate your time today. Thank
Okay,
you.
so if you could be in touch with Mrs. Fitzgerald regarding the process, it'll take us a few weeks to prepare the variance itself, and then When Mrs. Fitzgerald gets it, she'll file it with the town clerk, she'll give it to you, you record it at the Norfolk Registry, so that it'll run with the land, and we wish you best of luck to you. Oh, and the improvements need to be done within 1 year of the
Okay.
date of this hearing,
Okay,
or the variance will expire
all right.
by law.
Okay, thank you
Okay.
very much. I
Good
really
luck to you.
appreciate your time today.
Although
Okay.
Thank
You
you.
you can ask for an extension, but just make sure you do it before it runs out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you feel like you're running away, and you did so well.
I know, quick, get out of it.
Okay, you sold the car.
Thank you, I
Thank you,
appreciate
Mrs.
the time.
Parker. Bye now. Okay, who wants to do this? You want? Ginny, okay. Here you go, Ginny. That's all I have,
Very good.
okay? Okay, so it's a 7:45. We're gonna call our second hearing, which is a hearing of, upon the application of Peter J. Nash Sr., dated December 19, 2016, on file with the Board of Appeals, for variances from the terms of sections 4A2 and 3A of the Milton zoning bylaw. The applicant proposes to convert the existing family dwelling located at 120 Central Ave into 3 separate dwelling units, condominiums. Section 6A2 prohibits more than 1 dwelling unit on a single lot in a Residence B zoning district. Section 3A does not provide for and therefore prohibits the creation of multifamily dwellings in excess of 2 independent dwelling units. The applicants have requested a site visit, which we held on January 14th. All is set forth in the application and on plans to file with the Board of Appeals. Let me just pull a file here. My name is Jeff Mullen. I'll be chairing the hearing tonight, and with me, to my immediate right is Francis O'Brien, and to my left is Virginia Donahue King, both board members. I see that Mr. Corcoran and Mr. Nash have joined us. Welcome to the Board of Appeals. You just bear with me for a second. I just want to read the balance of the contents and then catch everybody up on what's happened on this application. I have, excuse me, in the files, an application completed by Mr. Corcoran on Mr. Nash's behalf, which contains an addendum with a significant amount of information about the property. There's a letter here from Mr. Prondak to Mr. Corcoran in connection with the application. There's a plot plan that appears to be a plan from the Registry of Deeds, a couple of other pieces of information, including details from the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System, and some other information about the location of the property, along with an abutters list. I'll advise everybody that on Saturday morning at 9:30, after a posting of the public hearing, we did do a site tour of this property. I see some people in attendance were there. Mrs. King, Mrs. O'Brien, Mrs. Fitzgerald, and I were there with Mr. Nash and his son and Mr. Corcoran. We toured the property for about an hour, maybe a little longer than an hour, interior and exterior, and then we closed that portion of I considered that to be informative and a portion of the hearing. Let me, just so that everybody knows what happened, I have notes from the meeting. I might as well read them. There's not that much, so I think people may benefit from them. So these are the notes that are going to go into the file. In attendance were myself, Mrs. King, and Mr. O'Brien. Cheryl Tugayas from the Milton Planning Board attended, although she was clear that she wasn't attending in her official capacity. She did have a few questions, and she was helpful, and it was great to see her. Diane Labonte was there, John Labonte, Catherine Smith, Peter Nash, and Peter Nash Jr. I opened the site visit at about 9:36. Mr. Corcoran did an overview of the site, excuse me, and that we were going to walk the exterior, seeing all 3 floors of the living space. During the site visit, the following questions were asked. How many parking spaces? How many will be needed? How will they be configured? Will there be exterior improvements to the pavement? Will there be an increase in the pavement for more parking than the current 3? What's the plan on the yard cleanup? How many entrances to the house? Will there be individual entrances to units? How many ways of egress, and how will the units be configured? The meeting then followed with a tour of each of the properties, each of the rooms in the home, up to the 3rd floor, and then we closed the hearing around 10:15 a.m. at which point we invited Mr. Nash to join us tonight and to continue the hearing. So, Mr. Nash and Mr. Corcoran, welcome to the Board of Appeals. How can we help you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman,
You're
and
welcome.
members of the board, and Edward Corcoran.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I have an email. I'm sorry, Ned. Just let me just read one more piece of correspondence that I haven't introduced. It just came in today at 3:45. This is a electronic communication from Richard Neely, former Board of Selectmen, member of the Board of Selectmen, who lives at 23 Russell Street, Milton. To the members of the Board of Appeals, dated January 17, I'm writing in opposition to the request for the Have you seen this?
I just did get a copy.
Okay. I'm writing in opposition to the request for the conversion of 120 Central Ave from a single-family to a single-family home to 3 condominiums. Although I am not in a butter, nor live on Central Ave, I am a town meeting member from Precinct 3, and I don't think single-family homes should be eligible to be converted ad hoc into multifamily housing, apartment or condos, in conflict with the zoning rules in place. I am sure the applicants can describe unique circumstances in their applications to your board, but this request is a material change to the zoning in place. The approval to this request by the Board of Appeals could set a precedent and open the doors to other unique requests from homeowners in single-family homes seeking to maximize the dollar value of their property at the expense of their neighbors, who would suffer from greater density of people and traffic along with parking problems and increased noise. I didn't buy my house in my neighborhood thinking that other single-family house could be converted to condos. Those of us who remain in our Milton home shouldn't pay the price for such a material change as is proposed by this request. Thank you. Richard Neely, 23 Russell Street. Okay, so that is that's the entire contents of the board's file. Mr. Corcoran, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, Edward Corcoran on behalf of Peter Nash, and I'm joined at the table, as you indicated, by Mr. Nash. I also want to thank you for attending the site walk on Saturday. It was cold. It was not a very pleasant day, but I appreciate the time and effort that the board put into it. And I think that largely because I think that, as perhaps Mr. Neely's note would indicate, it is somewhat unique. And I think the property speaks for itself in many ways. The condition of the premises speaks for itself in many ways and helps. Without understanding the condition, it's difficult to understand the basis of the application and the request. So, Peter Nash is a developer-builder who grew up in Ireland but has lived in Milton since at least 1974, when he purchased the property with his wife at 120 Central Avenue and raised his 2 sons there. They are, as I said, builders, developers, and have plans to renovate the premises, and I think, as you noticed on the tour, had begun some demolition with respect to interior renovation of the property when they realized that the extent of that interior renovation was going to be so significant that it may not have justified the value capture at the end of the project. I do have copies of site plan, of building plans that have been prepared for the Nashes, which I can give to you now. I indicated that we had those at the hearing and that I would, at the site walk, and that I would bring them, but they are 3 sets of plans. One is 3 sheets of existing floor plans, sheets A2, A3, and A4. And then there are alternatives plans for the build-out of each of the floors. The premises, the building was built in 1885. It's one of 3 properties that share a common driveway with the Smith and Tobin properties. Each of those properties, those buildings, was built in the 1880s. The Smiths is actually the smallest of the 3 buildings. It's about 3,500 square feet. This building is 5,400 square feet on 3 floors, and the Tobin residence is listed in town records as having approximately 6,400 square feet. It's actually a larger building. I would suggest that in some ways, some of these dwellings were built for another day. I think you observed on the site walk that there was a servant's quarters on the third floor of this building. It is a very, very large building with large floor plates, and I think difficult to think about today, a single family with smaller family sizes living in that type of building. The neighborhood is interesting. This property sits on the edge of Residence C and Residence B zone. There's a transition that occurs right at Griggs Lane on the property. Everything to the north of Griggs Lane towards the square is Residence C. Residence B begins at this property. This sheet, which I had provided to the board earlier, which is sort of a topography with properties identified, identifies a number of the properties that are immediately proximate to this that are already multifamily, pre-existing non-conforming structures built prior to zoning that have multiple units. There are three properties on the other side of Griggs Lane, numbered 112 Central Avenue and 116 Central Avenue, each of which is a two-family, according to town records. And 24 Griggs Lane, which is behind 116, is either a four-family or a five, depending on which record you review. Town records indicate 4 or 5 units, although several years ago in an application for variance and special permit to do some renovations to 24, the representation was that it was a 4-family. But in any event, you have a 2, and a 4. Directly across Central Avenue is a 2 at 107 Central, and 121 is a group home owned by the Milton Housing Authority, so that is a multifamily as well. As you head further out Central Avenue, 125, 120, 45, the properties are a single family, and the transition right there is from, as I said, from Residence C to Residence B. There is a bylaw in the town that does authorize special permit for conversion of a single family to a two-family if the property abuts on either side, within 100 feet of either side, another two-family. That is not strictly the case here, so we can't simply ask for that special permit because we don't have two families on either side. But I think that the proximity to multifamilies on the northerly side certainly lends credence to the notion that a multifamily might be appropriate in this case. I think, as we indicated on the site walk, the Nashers are planning to invest approximately $1 million into the renovation of this property. There is a significant amount of work. I think it was plainly visible by the fact that some walls had been removed, old electrical systems, old plumbing systems. There's a lot of effort and work that needs to go into making that property structurally and reasonably habitable, into the future. $1 million investment in a property that abuts 2 families, 4 families, and the Residence C neighborhood, I think it'd be difficult to say that it would justify the return if the property were then to be maintained as a single family and resold as a single family. I think the likelihood is that the property would potentially diminish. I have some other information to share with the board. It is a set of information about property values, sale prices for properties in Milton in the last 2 years. It was put together for another matter that I'm involved in. But I think it tells a story because Milton is not a $2 million town. With rare exception, properties in Milton sell for more than $1.2 million to $1.5 million. One of them is my next-door neighbor, but there was a $3 million investment in a historic federal next door to me, and it sold for $2.4 million. Most, the sales that exceed a number are properties that are on large properties in other parts of town. Can justify the investment for a large purpose. But there's very few of those properties that you would say would resell based on this type of investment. Of real significance, I think, is the fact that the property is historic. It is a contributing structure to the Columbine Rocks Historic District. It is specifically identified as a property that contributes on the MACRIS, or the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. And the information that I provided just is a cover of the information that is available. We did meet with the Milton Historical Commission and discussed briefly the notion of what we are trying to do. We think that it is the best way to ensure the restoration and preservation of a historic asset. The alternative probably is to think about demolishing the structure and converting to 2 lots with 2 small single-family homes on the 2 lots. It is a property that exceeds, it's 41,000 square feet. It has adequate frontage to think about converting to 2. And so that, I think, is a more, at the end of the day, is a more likely means by which you would capture value, but it wouldn't provide for the restoration, long-term preservation of a historic asset. And I think would tend to diminish as opposed to enhance the values of the significant and properties that are nearby. Certainly, the Smith House is a great house. The Tobin House is a great house. I think the board could see that as part of the site walk, that those are beautiful, and that this house ought to be restored to a similar character.
Okay.
With respect to the issue of hardship, which obviously is an important issue under the variance setting, Chapter 40, Section 9, Section 10, and speaking to the issue of variances, speaks with respect to particular land or structures, a variance from the terms of applicable zoning ordinance, where such permit granting authority specifically finds that owing to circumstances relating to soil conditions, shape, or topography of land or structures, and especially affecting such land or structures, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located, a literal enforcement, etc. It is the general rule, and it is the general application of the variance statute that you look at shape, topography, soil conditions as the means by which to justify a variance. The 2 points on that. The plan the May 6th plan that I took from the town's website in the initial package shows a fairly dramatic change in topography, and I think the board could see that when the board was out on the site walk. At the perimeter of the property, the elevation is roughly 55 to 56 feet. The house sits at elevation 72 feet. It sits on top of a pretty significant ledge outcropping at the high point of the property, and the property drops off on all sides. It makes it actually difficult, somewhat difficult, to think about demolishing and then converting to 2 lots, because you're now dealing with varying conditions to build what you could be authorized to build in a Residence B district. The statute also speaks to structures, and although it is rare, there is one case, Johnson versus the Board of Appeals of Wareham, a copy of which I have, where the court held in 1972 that a structure and the condition of the structure could be the basis under which you can find a hardship. That was a case where there was a church on in a small residential zone abutting a commercial zone, where the condition of the church, if it were going to be demolished or restored or replaced, wouldn't justify the cost to remove to create a single-family residence. And the court indicated in that case that the conversion to an office building would avoid the hardship associated with, I said, the hardship in not being able reasonably to use this unusual, if unique, and substantial existing building for any permitted purposes brings the case within the authorities of Dion, Sherman, and others with respect to variances. It's the only case that I'm aware of where they have focused on the notion of a building and the condition of a building as being the basis for, as forming the basis for a variance. And I think that's important in this case because although I understand Mr. Neely's point, this is a unique, somewhat unique building. It is historic. It's subject to the town's demolition delay bylaw. There is a goal to preserve these types of buildings. It has been lived in. It was been lived in for 40 years by this family. Kids grew up in it. It was built for another day, but it needs to be upgraded. And to do that, I think that the best way to preserve, maintain the exterior of the building while restoring the grace of the interior of the building is to create 3 flats and convert them to condominiums so that there is an ownership interest in those units and not simply rentals as exist on the other side of Griggs Lane. The last thing that I have is a very simple form of parking plan. Simply drew in some spaces on the plan. I think you would normally consider that you would have 2 vehicles per unit. I think it's easy to see that that physically on the ground, and I think we walked and showed where vehicles could park. It's easy to think about parking 6. The town does have a condominium conversion bylaw. It applies to lots that are 10 acres or more in size. With respect to parking, that bylaw provides for 1 parking space per unit. So, at least with respect to condominiums, the town has spoken with respect to the volume of parking. I think if this building were in a Residence A zone, it would tend to be on a lot, much larger lot, that would make its conversion and resale as a single family worth value, and/or would likely be on a large enough lot where you could actually think about taking advantage of the condominium conversion bylaw, because it is that type of a building. So, with respect to that, I thank the board for its time. I'm open to questions, obviously, and look forward to any further information that we can provide.
Okay, let me, I'm going to open it up to questions of the board. Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. And questions of the folks in the audience, but let me ask you a couple clarifying questions. You said you talked to the Historical Commission. That's the Milton Historical Commission?
Yes.
And did they, I know you said your view of the historical nature of the house, and you provided us with some documents. What did they tell you?
Well, Steve O'Donnell, who is the chair of the commission, is
Mr.
here, so I
O'Donnell.
don't want to speak for him.
Well, maybe he could speak for himself, if he wouldn't mind. Mr. O'Donnell, I saw you there, and welcome back to the Board of Appeals. Would you mind supplementing Mr. Corcoran's testimony with your view or the Commission's view of the historical character of the home?
Yeah, my name is Steve O'Donnell. I'm chairman of the Milton Historical Commission, and I'm here tonight speaking for the commission. The Historical Commission is very concerned about conservation and preservation of older Milton buildings, particularly housing stock. This is a building that we would be concerned about. It was designed by Albert Hollow in 1885 and built by him for his family. Mr. Hollow was a Massachusetts native, trained in Boston, also worked with McKim, Mead, and White in New York, came back to Boston to establish his firm. Besides his own house, he designed 3 other houses on Columbine Road, as well as the Robbins House in Milton Academy. He lived in the house until 1899, when he relocated his architectural practice out of town, out of state, and the house was subsequently occupied by prominent attorneys and a naval architect named William Stearns. The Historical Commission can't address whether or not the building no longer functions as a single family. That's not in our purview. But if a change in the structure of the occupancy is going to encourage, enhance, or ensure the preservation of the property, we feel that is a very positive step to take. Milton is constantly losing these large old homes. This one is quite large. Again, we can't address whether or not it functions as a single family or could function as a single family or what the relative costs are. What we see is a historic home that is endangered. If relief is granted by this board, we would hope that the historical and architectural elements at the house now are retained and preserved, including things like the stone sheathing, the chimneys, a particularly notable entrance door setup, which is typical, according to what's been written, typical of Mr. Barlow's style. Mr. Corcoran is correct in everything he said about the history of the house. It is definitely a historic house. It is, as he suggested, very typical of houses along this section of Central Avenue. And although he didn't mention this to the Historical Commission, we could see what an alternative would be, that is demolition and replacement. You don't have to go very far down Central Avenue before you see new construction which tries to fit in with the existing older homes. Again, we can't address whether or not it functions as a single family, but if changing the structure of the residences in the house is going to enhance the preservation, then from our perspective, that's a good thing.
Can I ask you if the Historical Commission has had similar applications in the recent past along the lines of what we're talking about
No.
tonight? Do you know if this is the first time this has ever happened in
It's
the
the,
town?
it's the, to my knowledge, it's the first time that we've been aware of it. I mean, we have had condominium projects built around large homes, but in terms of conversion of a single family into condos, not to my knowledge, no.
Have you, has the commission taken, thank you, has the commission taken the effort to catalog the historical characteristics of the home? I know you mentioned 3, the chimneys, the rock exterior, and the entrance, the rock sheeting. But are there other things that you would like to see preserved if this were to happen
Well, these
in a
were
formal
pulled,
way or anything like
these
that?
were pulled out of the Macris filing with the
Saw that,
Mass
yeah.
Historical Commission. And if I can read just 3 or 4 lines, the side lit center entrance is set within a molded, pendimented enframement. And an architect in a book on historical architecture indicated it was typical of the zone of those designed by Harlow and his firm. The section of the 3-bay facade with the entrance and one of the windows is recessed under deep boxed eaves which are lined with rafter tail brackets. The rafter tail brackets are also found on the gabled end. She states that they indicate the firm's developing interest in the craftsman's style 10 to 15 years before the style became popular. So this architect was a little forward-looking, but clearly, if you look at the house, there are significant architectural features there which should be retained, and we would hope that they would be retained and dealt with sensitively.
Terrific. Let me ask if members of the board have questions.
What about How does the Historical Commission feel about the interior of the home?
We'd love to see it retained exactly as it is. However,
You'd rather walk through it.
in order to make old homes functional in today's world, very often the interior has to be significantly renovated. It really depends on the intent of the owner. I'm aware of one home that just underwent phenomenally extensive renovations. The family was out of the house about a year and a half, and their object was to restore as much of the interior as they could. Older houses than this, built 18th century homes, for example, early 19th century homes, very often have a series of very small rooms which may not function well in today's world, so they need to be opened up. Once again, the commission would hope that as much of the interior elements, architectural elements, would be retained. But it's more important to us that the building be retained, even though the interior might be modified.
Can I speak just to that one point briefly? One of the things I think we did show, when we met with the commission, we showed a set of photographs of the interior. The commission separately did not for the inside. But I think the larger rooms with as the board saw, with the significant woodworking, are intended to be preserved. That woodworking is fairly magnificent and wants to be preserved. I think most of the demolition work that's occurred is sort of in the old kitchen and other areas of the property. The property itself is got, it's lived in, and it's not up to date, but the notion is to adequately and as fully as possible to preserve what's good about the interior architecture and historic nature of the interior architecture. We're bringing some of the bathrooms and the kitchen areas up to a more modern standard.
Well, what I'm looking at in particular, and I would like your opinion of what the board, the commission would be thinking about that, is that on the first floor, there's a dining room with built-ins and nice woodworking, et cetera. I see on these plans that we were given tonight that will be losing some walls and will become a kitchen. Is that's not preserving that room at all. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, again, we would prefer that what these, and I haven't seen these plans before tonight, we would prefer that that didn't happen, but everything is relative. Do we lose some of the interior walls? Do we lose the house? Do we lose the site? Because, as Mr. Corcoran mentioned, this house sits up on a knoll, placed, I'm sure, very intentionally by the architect in order to raise him up above, looking out and perhaps looking at those other houses on Columbine Road that he had designed. If we lose the house, we'd rather lose something than lose everything. If saving the structure means losing some of the interior, everything's a trade-off. And if you look at what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years with developers and contractors coming in and buying old homes, going through the demolition delay process with the Historical Commission. The Historical Commission imposes a 9-month demolition delay, and at the end of the 9 months, they bring in the bulldozer. So it's a balance.
Mr. O'Brien?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Mr. O'Donnell?
I don't think so. If I can
Okay.
answer any questions, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I appreciate, are you going to be able to stay for the
Oh, yes.
balance of the hearing? Okay, thank you. You're welcome to sit, or, let me ask you, before you leave, let me just ask you, Mr. Corcoran. You heard Mr. O'Donnell quote from the Macris filing. And I know we have some conceptual drawings, but we really don't know what the plans are. You presented the alternative. We had a whole bunch of questions about exterior improvements as we walked through Can you say definitively that you won't be, or that the development will not be altering any of the elements that are mentioned in the Macris filing? One way or the other?
Yes, I think the only,
Yes, they will be impacted, or yes, you are answering that they definitively will not be impacted?
no,
No.
those elements will not be impacted. The only exterior change, I think, is something that addresses an add-on. It's the outdoor stairway may be brought inside.
The current outdoor
The current
staircase
outside
to the
staircase.
left of the house.
Correct. Which I don't think is part of the original structure. Would be enclosed for purposes of adequate access and egress.
So let me just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think we should be clear on this point. What you're saying is that they, to the extent the property proceeds to be modified as proposed, despite the fact that you don't know how it's going to be modified, you are able to commit that none of the elements that are in the Macris filing will be altered.
Correct.
Okay.
And we would agree, I think, with the condition that any plans would be presented and reviewed by the Historical Commission for their approval.
Okay. I have one more question, and I'd like to open it up to the audience. You mentioned, and we talked about at the hearing, the fact that this is a shared driveway with two other homes. Let me make sure I've got this right. Bear with me.
Look at this plan.
It's numbers 45 and 148.
Correct.
45 Ruggles Lane.
Yeah, 45 Ruggles and 148 Central Ave. Now, let me ask you, does 45 Ruggles Lane have another entrance?
Yes.
They have an entrance on Ruggles Lane? Yeah, a dirt road.
Yep.
Yeah, all right. But the driveway that comes up from Central Avenue, and I know I see the woman who lives at 148, she was at the hearing, and 45, that's a shared driveway.
Correct.
It's used all the time, every day.
Yes.
And what does the deed say?
The deed says that each property owner owns to the middle of that driveway. So the 120 Central owns half, and 148 owns the other half. And 45 Ruggles and 148 own to the middle of that combined frontage. So it is a common driveway. Each property owns to the middle of the driveway, and each has common rights with the other to access.
Cross
the
easement
driveway.
arrangement?
It's an old set of easement arrangements that exist in the old deeds and are shown on older plans. There hasn't been anything more recent. We've had, in November, we had a neighbor meeting at the library. The Tobins and the Smiths were present. We followed up with a site walk in November. Mrs. Smith was present to walk through the house, and we've had conversations and shared emails about sort of redefining what that shared easement arrangement is to provide a greater set of protections for each other, because as we understand it, others use it fairly commonly to cut through from Central Avenue to Ruggles Lane. They don't go all the way to Ruggles and take the left, they cut through, and that's a fairly common thing. We have reached out and offered to, I've reached out and offered to sort of take the lead in drafting a new set of, a new easement, set of easements and restrictions so that there could be new signage, new control over how unrelated parties use them.
Okay. So let me make sure I have this point, and we have this point. Mr. Nash owns his property in fee. His property is subject to an easement in favor of Mrs. Smith to share the driveway. Do the Tobins have rights in the Nash property as well?
Yes.
Oh, so they're a benefited party of the easement.
They're all burdened.
Is that 13 feet wide, or is it 7.5 feet wide? Or 6.5 feet wide?
The paved way is
About
about
13 feet wide.
13.
I see the passageway at 13 feet wide on this plot plan from South Boston Savings.
Each owns 6.5 feet.
Okay. So, Mr. Nash, do you also have property rights over the Tobin property in fee to get to Ruggles Lane?
Yes.
Okay, no, you don't know.
We don't know. We
Okay,
were
I mean,
told-
we'll-
we were told no when we bought the house, but we never explored it to
You
this
could
level.
bring your deed to the Board of Appeals, we'll take a look at it. But what I'm, okay, so you have, Mr. Nash, in addition to owning the fee in half the road, has the benefit of an easement in half of the road that's owned in fee by Mrs. Smith. Is that right?
Yes.
And right now, that arrangement goes pretty well?
Yeah.
People pretty happy with it? Okay. Is there anything in the deeds that limit the access for the purpose of a single-family home? Anything like that? Or is there any purpose limitation? I have the right to pass and repass for the purpose of accessing my historic single-family home that I just built up on the top of Columbine Rocks Historic District? Something like that? Something like that?
No.
So it's just an easement that says the right to pass and repass, or something to that effect. And as far as each of you are concerned, you each own the fee in some of it, but you all share commonly in having the right to pass and repass. And anybody outside of the three of you who's passing and repassing, unless they're a invitee, is a trespasser.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. That's helpful, and I'd like to hear from the abutters as well, but I just wanted to understand. And then, what about access, Mr. Nash, you have access to Griggs Lane?
Yes.
You do? How is that?
We never use it.
Well, you don't use it because it's a big gully, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah, it's a private
Yeah.
road and it's. we
Have you
never-
ever used it?
Once in a while, but the neighbor down the street, he closed it off. He put a gate across it, went on to the school.
The person on Griggs Lane, the one who's accessing it to School Street?
That's 27 Griggs Lane.
Yeah, but at one point, this passageway that is half on Smith and half on Nash actually went all the way to Griggs Lane, right? No,
No,
never did?
Not in recent years. No.
It did, it looks like it might have originally.
Way back it was. There was an old deed that, there was a kind of right of way going,
Yeah,
an easement going both ways.
I'm not sure which.
that's what this would indicate.
Yeah, I think there was a,
No, I understand the topography,
that's the old deed, there was
yeah.
an easement
That's
going by your, the
common
barn, way
driveway,
down the
that
back
comes off
stables.
Central
Let's
Avenue.
have one hearing.
We never used it.
We'll have one hearing.
Okay.
Go ahead, what were you saying, Mr. Nash?
There was an old map of the,
Yeah,
yeah, there was an easement going by his stables down back from Briggs Lane to Ruggers Lane. But we never used it.
yeah, okay. My point is that we use it or not, it may very well be there.
Yeah, but it's no
I
use.
understand you don't
Yeah.
use it, I'm just asking if it's there.
I think it's there, it used to be there.
Okay. All right, that's all I have right now, but do you have anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Corcoran or Mr. Nash?
No, I just reserve the right to.
Mr. O'Donnell, do you have anything you'd like to add? No. Okay, members of the board at this time?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. Corcoran, I just want to go back to the series of questions that the chairman asked concerning the exterior stairway, so that I'm clear on it in my own mind. Are you contemplating removing that completely?
Yes.
I think, yes, I think
Yeah.
that the idea is that, if you can see from the first floor plan, at the bottom of the plan is the central entrance, and then and that's stepped out, there's a step in, and it comes
Yeah.
along here. That exterior stair is located at the left end of the property. The idea would be to remove that stair and close it and rebuild a more appropriate access to other units within the building.
Okay, That lies my question, because during the course of the site visit, it was mentioned, again, removing the exterior stairway, then rebuilding it so that it remains an exterior stairway. There was some conversation about, I was under the impression that there could be some fairly substantial change to the front of the house if you did that.
Well, there's no question that there would be change to this end of the house. That stairway is some sort of an add-on at a later date.
Right.
That stairway would be removed. The plan would be to enclose that area, and any new stairway access will be provided inside to the units. So,
But there would be an additional,
no additional exterior stair.
no additional exterior stay, but there would be an exterior addition.
Yes,
Okay.
on that, in that corner, in that area, that part of the building.
Thank you.
I have one more question before we get to the next thing. We mentioned the condominium conversion bylaw. And we mentioned energy savings at the town hall, and we're all And it's indicative that we're gonna keep everybody in the dark tonight about the hearing. Have you gone through the bylaw, and are you able to tell the Board of Appeals whether or not the applicant would be willing or able to comply with every provision of the condominium conversion bylaw, with the exception of the size of the lot? There's a lot of them, you're not gonna be able to do it in the next minute.
I've gone through it,
It's pretty detailed,
it's very detailed.
master deed, et cetera. Okay.
All of,
So you don't know, you haven't, you're not ruling it out, but you don't know right now?
no, my advice to the applicant, and the basis upon which this application was filed, is that this would be a conversion. We would, and that a decision of the board ought to make that a condition, that the property be converted for condominium purposes and not left as simply a three-family for rental purposes. Because I think that's important to the long-term preservation of value and the sense of value for the neighborhood and for the property. And so, yes, I've gone through, I've been through that bylaw in the conversion of another property in town. A lot of it deals with, it's a planning board bylaw. It deals with the power within the planning board to do a lot of things, a lot of which are site-related and whatnot, that I think are not necessarily appropriate in this case. Perhaps site plan approval in some form might be appropriate if there was if the site plan approval requirements apply to the site. But the starting point is that bylaw addresses properties that exceed 10 acres or more, and are meant, the notion of preserving historic buildings on these large properties and allow you to add other buildings up to a number that is equal to, of units, that is equal to n-1, where n is the number of acres, and the number of units you can provide is one less than the number of acres. And
So it
so,
would be zero for you.
in
You
this
have
case,
one
it's
acre.
zero, because you have
I
one.
understand.
Right. But it's really intended to be a measure of preservation of these larger estates.
Yeah.
And how do you preserve those within the character of the town? So 333 Brush Hill Road, which has 14 units on 17 acres, and the Milton Street condominium out at Milton and Brush Hill Road, Blue Hill Avenue, is 20-some acres and has a significant number of units. Some in the preservation of the existing structures and others in the addition of new structures, the combination of which is allowed under that bylaw.
Yeah, no, my point is, we've got 4 pages of detail on condominium conversion. You've picked out a couple of points where you comply, but we really haven't discussed what really looks like a pretty thoughtful regimen that was put in place by town meeting. I don't remember when, but I just wanted the details on that. We may come back to that point. Let me do this. Assuming that you're finished with your testimony for now, reserving the right to come back, let me ask if there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak in support of the application. Hearing none, let me ask if there's anybody who would like to speak in opposition to the application. Mr. Tobin. And Mrs. Smith, you want to come together? Mr. Tobin first? Mr. Tobin, welcome to the Board of Appeals. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Mind if I step aside?
Mr. Corcoran, yeah, you can,
Do you want me at the mic?
please, yeah, please. I think
My
they
first-
appreciate that on the
first set
audio.
hearing.
That would be great. So, is this the first time in front of the Board of Appeals?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So welcome to the Board of Appeals. If you could state your name, your address,
Sure.
and then let us know how we can help you tonight.
Sure. I'm Ed Tobin. This is my wife, Christine Tobin.
Christine, do you want to come up and? You sure? Okay.
Got the short straw.
You're welcome.
I've been inviting her. I'd just rather,
Okay.
in case I miss something. Yes, we bought the house about 9 years ago. 9.5, 10 years ago, 45 Ruggles Lane. You saw it, I suppose, at the walkthrough. We are immediately adjacent, and we do share the driveway with the Smiths and the Nashes. I guess
I'm sorry, Mr. Tobin, is that also your building if you were looking at your house over to the right?
down the hill, a barn, yeah, that's part of our property.
And you get that through another driveway? How do you get there?
There is another driveway.
Yeah.
It goes out to Ruggles. And
Right.
apparently
Through
that
somebody
that was a
else's property.
stables.
Yes,
Yes, Yeah,
65, what is she, 65?
57.
57.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
yeah.
So you have two buildings, you have two entrances.
Yes.
Actually, three entrances.
three,
Two
yeah,
entrances off of Ruggles, one to your barn and one to your property,
yes.
your house. And then you have a separate entrance in the, kind of in the back, that's through Mr. Nash's and Mrs. Smith's house.
No.
No, actually,
we don't
the,
have
Oh, you don't get through
It's
there?
fenced
Let-
off,
let-
it's been, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr.
I just gonna say, the main driveway we use is the one we share with the Smiths and the Nashes. That's the front door.
Yeah,
Okay,
That's
is that
the
what you
one
were
that I-
saying? Okay,
yeah.
and the one in the back is, we put in a basketball court, it's in front of the barn, and it goes out to Ruggles. So that's a second way to exit to Ruggles. It goes out, if we went out the back of our house and down the hill, we would access that back driveway.
but for your purposes, even though you have a Ruggles address, you really feel like you live on Central Ave, because that's how you come and go.
No, usually we come and go through Ruggles.
Oh, you
That's
come
what I'm
and go
trying to
through
say, is our driveway, we usually take a left and go out Ruggles. I suppose it depends on where we're going. We go in both directions.
Gotcha, okay,
And
okay, fine. You have two entrances, at least, to your home,
yes,
and then you have another entrance to your barn.
yes,
Okay, fine.
okay. I am an attorney, but I am not a land use attorney, so I know that all of you are experts. We have tried to keep an open mind and listen to the plans as explained. We did attend a meeting at the library, which I thought was appropriate and helpful. But hearing what we've heard, I have to say that we are not in support, and we are opposed to this change to condos. And I guess it's for several reasons. Some of the arguments that you read earlier from the letter from Mr. Neely capture some of our thoughts, though I haven't met Mr. Neely. I think this what really comes down to is whether it's appropriate to change the zoning so that the Nashes can have a better economic return. And I don't think that's a compelling reason to make the zoning change. I don't agree with council's view that the house is a house that was built for another day. We live in a house that was built, I believe, not the same year, the same time period. It's a large house. We moved here, we love the house, and we have a large family, and we enjoy it. And there are other large families with large homes, and I think there's a market. I hope a robust market, but I know there's a market for large homes. I think there's a market for this home. It may not be at the price, the sale price that the Nashes would like, but that would be, I think, the remedy. If it's a single-family home, it's a single-family neighborhood. If you go to Ruggles Lane, it's single-family homes. If you go in a number of directions from our house, it's single-family homes. The only way to not have single-family homes is to go to Griggs, which we don't consider our neighborhood. It is one way to look at it, I suppose, but it's not the neighborhood that we consider ourselves part of. And if you look at Herrick or Ruggles or, you know, many parts of Central, there are lots of big homes with big families. The Columbine is right there, and there's lots of big homes there that have long histories that are still attractive from a market perspective. The house was on the market. I don't know the details. I do know that I was approached by people in town with questions about the house. It seems to me that there is an interest, there would be an interest in the house as it is. Maybe not, again, maybe not at the price that was hoped for, but that's real estate. You know, I've bought and sold houses, having lived in Seattle and Denver and DC, till we moved back to Massachusetts, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But I think it's a rather extraordinary thing to change the zoning so that you can achieve the economic return that you were hoping for. I do think there are less radical ways to get there and preserve the historic nature of the house. We like the looks of the house. Our house is an old house. We like old houses. But we don't think it's a reason to change the zoning, that it's too large, or that there's not a market for large houses in Milton. I don't find that credible. I also have a hard time understanding where the $1 million investment is coming from, or we hadn't heard about that, I don't believe. I'm not sure how that's enforceable by your authority or anyone's, or what guarantee we would have that any real investment would be made once the zoning change to condos was accomplished. In fact, what I thought I remembered from our meeting at the library was there wasn't going to be a substantial investment. So I guess that was new information, the $1 million investment figure. Other than that, I guess we're having a hard time seeing the hardship here, why we're doing this, other than for the reasons that seem obvious. And we would prefer to keep the zoning the way it currently is. Anything else?
Well, and there's no way to.
Mrs. Tobin, come on, you join us.
We moved in with, 4 small children, and there's no way to, who's moving in, and once
They
they're.
want to catch your, I'm sorry, they want to catch your voice on the mic, sorry.
Well, no, but there's no way to, who's moving in? And once it's deeded as 3 separate condos, who's to say it's not Airbnb, and it's not, home away, or who's living there? I mean, I don't know. And that's not, we didn't buy the house for that. We bought the house to walk to Glover and do all the stuff that you do when you move in with 4 small kids. And, I would not have purchased the house if it was next to 3 condos. And, if it was luxury condominiums, I don't know, maybe I would have thought about it, but probably not. We have a home, I don't know how many, a couple acres, our kids are always in the driveway with the Smiths children playing lacrosse, and they play catch, and it's usually just the Nashes, the Smiths, and the Tobins on the driveway. And we go slow, and we know there are kids usually, there's nets out, and it's, a very family-oriented little section. And if now we have, I don't know, if it was 2 cars designated per condo or 1, they're gonna be going through, I would not have purchased the home, and to just change the zoning because he can't sell the house, well, we had a house in Seattle we couldn't sell for 3 years. We lost a lot of money, and that's life. It was terrible, but, so what? We didn't ask the Seattle people to change the zoning on our big old home so we could break it up into condos. We just bit the bullet and moved on. I don't see the real rationale. I don't see a pressing, I don't really feel like that there's a reason for it, other than he can't sell the house, when actually, we know of people who made an offer, but it wasn't the price he wanted. and, or they couldn't sell their house fast enough, and they didn't get the house. And it was, you know, a nice little family. I knew the girl. She was like, I'm gonna babysit for you guys. They came over to speak with us, remember?
I do.
So I think there is a market for, and you know, to say that it's a house from a bygone era, I mean, look, I spend all of my free time working on my house. It's old and it's drafty and the bills are huge and the heating and we're always fixing stuff and new roof, new this, new that. But that's, I bought an old house. I didn't buy a new house, I bought an old house. I knew it was gonna be pain, and I knew it was gonna be a labor of love, and we do it, you know? The kids stack the firewood, and we do all that stuff. But to say it's a house of a bygone era, ours is bigger than theirs. So I don't feel like that's an argument at all. And I know, I mean, there's a giant Tudor on Central Ave, that is at the end of Ruggles, that sold. And there's a nice young family in there, and they say the same thing, like, you know, the gutters are wood and they need to be oiled every year. I'm like, I know. But that's what you do, like, that's an old house. So, I don't know, I don't really feel like there's a compelling reason. And I really don't, my biggest problem is that I don't have any control of, you know, who's moving in.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mrs. Tobin. Do either of you have anything you'd like to add at this time? Okay. Thank you both. Let me ask, if there's anybody else who would like to speak in opposition to the application. Mrs. Smith, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Hi, it's Kathy Smith, 148 Central Avenue. And I guess what I have is concerns, and we've started some conversations about concerns regarding the right-of-way on the driveway. My initial concerns were that whether it was my children, they're a little bit older now, but driving cars, which is always a concern. But if we were to ever sell our house and we were selling it to a young family and they could not enjoy having the common driveway between our two houses as like kind of part of the yard, and that at any time there could be more traffic than just the postal worker or the occasional nosy person or a delivery person, I think that people would see that as a safety concern. And also, when many people visit our house and the shared houses on those driveways, they do, they're in awe of this protected private little enclave. And so I think that there are definitely some issues related to the driveway and what we found to be enchanted with when we purchased the property 12 years ago. I do have some questions, and I don't know if it's okay for me to ask, like Mr. O'Donnell, you know, what large houses we are losing and where they are in Milton, that we're losing them, and then people are building something that is not liked.
Mr. O'Donnell, would you mind assisting us with some of the answers? We appreciate your time.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
And if you can't answer, that's fine. We
Yeah.
can.
So my question is, like, how are we losing these large homes in Milton, and where is this? And you also made a comment about new construction just down the road that people are trying to build to make look like it belonged in the neighborhood. And I know there's one house as you're heading up Maple that was built on an extra piece of property sometime in our living in Milton. And it looks like it fits in just fine. Otherwise, just down the road, as you go toward the Central T, we have, you know, a lot of multifamilies. And I understand that we have the group home, and we all understand that. And I know that the line is at Griggs Lane, but I don't know, you know, where you see these large homes in Milton that we're losing. And, you know, I know there are condo issues way out in town and things like that, but where else, especially close to us in the Columbines, are we losing?
In the Columbines, I'm not aware of any, I am not aware of any in that area. Brush Hill Road area, Blue Hill Avenue, yes. My comment about the demolition delay bylaw is general for the town, not specific to a neighborhood. Let me back up a little bit. The Historical Commission is, as I said, is not taking a position on whether or not this is no longer a functional single-family home. Other things being equal, we prefer it to remain a single-family home. However, and I find it very difficult to argue with anything that's been said. If the alternative is to demolish it and build something else, and that's a big if, then maybe what's being proposed is a way to preserve the house. I'm not at all sure that's the only alternative either. I don't know anything about what marketing was done with this house. I don't know anything about that at all.
Mr. O'Donnell, just to be clear, we understood that from your
Okay,
initial
but-
testimony.
You know,
That was
I
clear.
just want to make sure that Mrs. Smith does as well.
Okay. And you talked about some new construction somewhat near our house that is a bit of an issue. Is that true
No,
or
not really an issue, but there is new construction right there at the corner of, is it Griggs?
Yes, it was brought in on trucks into
Yes.
town.
Yeah, stacked up.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah,
I'm
it
I'm not
looks great.
suggesting it's,
Yeah.
there's anything detrimental about it. I'm
Yeah.
just
It
saying
looks fine.
it's,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay, I think that works.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Mrs. Smith.
Yes, so there was a question from Frank about, I'm sorry, Mr.
He goes by Frank.
Mr. O'Brien, my apologies, that the stairs, you know, they said you kept going over the stairs and saying, are they gonna be taken down or rebuilt or covered? And I guess that made me ask the question, will there be any additions to the property? It's a very large property right now, and will there be, and I guess this goes to Mr. Nash and Mr. Corcoran, will there be additions to the property, and is that actually just none of our business? Is it any of your business? And is that some later stage where there's approval later if this approval goes through?
We're definitely gonna make it part of our business. That's an unanswered question. I can tell you that there are no proposals yet, but we also don't have a definitive plan, so we don't know. But it might be worth hearing from the applicant as to what the current thinking is right now on that point.
I think that point is that only with respect to that exterior stair to the left of the main entrance, that stair would be removed, that area would be enclosed, and new access to portions of the building would be provided at that location. I don't think there's any other plans at this point to do any other additions to the property.
So, and the access would be exterior or interior?
Well, there probably would be a door
From the
from
to
the outside, but the stairway would be inside.
Mrs. Smith.
At the earlier site visit, there were comments made about adding off the back toward Griggs Lane, and so that's why I asked that question. So,
That is the same area. That stairwell is on the Griggs Lane. That exterior stairway is on the Griggs Lane side of the building. And the addition.
it's kind of at an angle similar to our house. And so when we looked out the back of the house during the site visit, this was the direction that people pointed to as being the addition, and that is kind of off at an angle toward Griggs Lane, and it drops precipitously at an angle toward Griggs Lane. So I was just curious if there was any, if there isn't no set plans, then also this is something that was brought up in the very first site visit. And it would make the building bigger, off at an angle toward Griggs Lane. And so if you don't know about it, then obviously it was just something that was mentioned.
Let me just, it's an interesting point, and I want to clarify. I know it's said it a couple of times, but maybe it's not clear. When for people who weren't there, when we're doing the site visit, we had a lot of questions about the interior configuration and how the building would be, for lack of a better term, subdivided to make these 3 units. The indication at the time was that 1 unit would be devoted to each floor. So you've really got a 3-story home. It's indicated on the drawings, a first floor, second floor, and a mezzanine. And that would mean that each floor would have a full kitchen and a bath, appropriate bedrooms, etc. Tonight we've been presented with plans which are prepared in the alternative. So we actually don't know what the ultimate configuration will be, and I think that's part of Mrs. Smith's questioning is to, what are we really looking at? And one area that was of interest to the Board of Appeals and perhaps even more to Mrs. Tagayas from the Planning Board were the exterior modifications to the property regarding entrances and exits to the various units. And that's the type of questions that Mrs. Smith is asking right now. So proceed, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. And I grew up in an old house in a big family, and most of the improvements that we made were done by us because that's just how it goes.
How'd
When
they
you-
come out?
Somebody else owns it now. They did not demolish it. There are actually yoga studios in our big family room and the room above, which is a joyful way to make use of part of an old house. So, and it is not an estate, so it probably has nothing to do with it. But over those years, there were some improvements made, but we did not improve one bathroom beyond maybe replacing a toilet. It's always fixing it up bit by bit. And I know that affects the sale of homes if you haven't updated something in the time that you've been there or in the recent time that you've been there. So, and so I would understand that if you had made the investment in the improvements over time, that then you would reap the benefits of it. As recently I got the house evaluated, and we've done a lot of work and the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and our home right now, the value of it is just a little bit over what we paid for it 12 years ago. So, our take-home message from that is we've improved it, but it will not probably benefit as much as we, really hoped it would until we probably put some magnificent kitchen in or something like that. So, it is interesting because we have put a lot of time and money into our house, and somebody else will come along and love it at some point too, and I want to make sure that when I sell it when we sell it that, we at least, don't sell it for a loss. So I would think that if you've been in a house for 40 years, my concern would be that if you haven't invested in it all along, that it's hard to expect much out of it at the end. And I understand that this is one way to change, the past 40 years. And I'll leave it at that. My last question would be, would we be here, and maybe what I don't understand is like the B and the C, and we're on that line between B and C, residency B and C. Would we be in this room tonight talking about this if they were going to convert it to 2 condos or a 2-family? We would
Yes.
Yes.
we would still be here. Okay, so we would have to be okay with even a 2-family. Okay. I guess one of my concerns is why push it to 3? It's probably in some ways been potentially used as a 2-family in the past, and in the past 40 years. And I believe that it's just something to consider. 3, pushes some things a little bit, might be pushing some buttons. If for some reason this falls flat, it might be a consideration. So I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Do you have any questions?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Let me ask if there's anybody else who would like to speak in opposition to the application. Okay, anybody have any questions of the applicant? I see Mr. Clark from the town of Milton is here. Would the town of Milton like to make any statements on this conversion?
No, sir.
Can I ask you, Bill, if this is the first condo conversion that that the Board of Appeals has handled? Since the bylaw was passed? I ask you that because between Ginny and Frank and myself, we've been on this board a long time. It's the first one I've been on. More than 15 years. Frank?
I can't remember
Ginny?
one.
I think the only one I know is Brushwood.
Yeah.
More than 10 acres.
Yeah, more than 10 acres though, complies
been-
with the bylaw. Yeah,
There've been lots of conversions,
yeah,
but conversions where there were already existing 2s and
Yeah.
3s.
yeah. Well, what we're wondering about is, and this is probably an interesting question by Mrs. Smith on the 3 versus the 2. It's the use of the variance proceeding to convert a single to the condos, and whether or not that in and of itself is a precedent for the board. I think that it is, or at least I can't think of another time that we've done this. And it's not dispositive one way or the other, but I think it's an interesting point. We ought to understand it.
I know we We've taken,
You're gonna, now that you're, now that you're engaged, they're gonna wanna, hear you on the mic. Just introduce yourself, Bill.
William Clark, Planning Director for the town of Milton.
Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. The only other condo conversions that I am familiar with are two-family homes where people convert.
Yeah, okay.
There is no mechanism within our bylaws there's no special mechanism that has to be done.
So that's converting rental units to home
Yep.
ownership. Yeah, okay, a little bit different, yeah.
So
Thank you for that.
that's the only other one.
Allowed under state law.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think the request here, just to clarify that, is this board needs to be able to vary whether it's a single or two or three family. And we're suggesting that if the board agrees to do that, it be conditioned that it become a condominium conversion and not simply a conversion to a multifamily for purposes of rental.
Fair point, thank you. Okay, anybody else have anything they want to add? Okay, with that, I'm a little bit reluctant to close the evidence portion of the hearing, given what we've heard tonight. I want to hear from the board maybe about the nature of this case and where we are. Does anybody want to speak to that before we close the evidence?
I think that that's, I think that that's wise, Mr. Chairman. This is, I think is, you've got a veteran board here. We haven't had this particular type of case with these particular facts come before the board. And it's not a simple case. The first case this evening is, if you will, the typical kind of case that we hear all the time.
It's how we make our money.
It's how, yes.
It's what we're getting paid to do,
And,
so to speak.
But you got time and a half on Saturdays. So.
right.
Double time Saturday for
And
Saturdays.
folks in the audience might have asked, okay, why aren't they asking anything? Well, it's because we've seen that particular type of case 100 times before, and it's important to the homeowner, but for us sitting on the board, we see this type of thing all the time, and it was very well presented. This particular case is not something that we see all the time. You've got a wide variety of disciplines up here. Not all of us are land use lawyers. There are a couple, but you know, some of us have learned the land use stuff by osmosis. There are some troubling implications to this decision. I'm troubled by the implications of changing a single-family dwelling into a multiple-family dwelling in the middle of what is essentially a single-family neighborhood. I get that. I get the concerns. And zoning is designed to protect not only the town, but the abutters, as well as the owner and everything else. On the other hand, the site visit was instructive. It is a unique building, uniquely sited, and one of the reasons for zoning and the zoning variance and special permit process is to deal with unique situations such as this. The building itself is shockingly ill-maintained, and so is the property. It looks very nice from the street, but once you get up close to it, you know, there's a cast iron sink in the front yard. There's an old dishwasher in the back. It looks like the leaves have been dumped out the back over the ledge for years. You go inside, and it's clear that there is construction in process. There are a lot of architectural elements in that building that I'd love to see saved, but quite frankly, I think Mr. O'Donnell from the Historical Commission hit the nail on the head. A lot of this stuff you just can't doesn't function in the modern world. Fortunately, though, a lot of these rooms, I think, have molding and other architectural elements that are worth saving, and to the applicant's credit, a lot of the stuff has been saved. How that works into if the relief is granted here, would have to see. It's nice to see plans. Frankly, one of my biggest hang-ups with this is that I don't think that these plans are definitive enough. And I will be blunt, they're just not definitive enough for me to grant relief on. The relief being sought here is aggressive. On the other hand, if we take the point of view that this is a building worth saving, and I think that Mr. Cochran does make a point in the sense of the topography of the locus is quite unique. There is a lot of ledge. And, you tear it down, could a builder economically get a two single-family homes in there? I don't know. On the other hand, from an economic point of view, is it worth saving, or can it be saved to maintain it as a single family? I don't know either. I don't know how this home was marketed or whatnot. I know in its current condition, it's not going to get the return on investment that somebody might want. So to wind this up, to kind of land the plane, where am I at on this? I'm kind of signaling that I'm reluctant to grant the relief. Having said that, I'm not foreclosing granting relief, but I don't feel that I have sufficient information from the point of view of what's going in there, where it's going in there. I congratulate Mr. Cochran for his imaginative presentation of a simplified parking plan, but that's a key issue. Where's stuff going to go? Where's the parking going to be? How are the issues with the shared driveway going to be dealt with? I have had a couple of questions answered relative to some of the exterior renovations, but, for example, one of the things that we don't have is a plan showing definitively what the exterior renovations are going to be. In addition, looking at some of the plans here, as we were walking the site, there's an outcropping, looked like it could have been, I don't know, a patio, or, I hesitate to call it a deck because it's made out of stone. I'm not sure what additional exterior amenities would be going on here. So that's kind of where I'm at. We're a little bit further along than we were coming out of the site visit. At least we have some prospective plans. But given the nature of this application, given the precedent that it sets, I'm really reluctant to go forward without a more definitive set of plans.
Fair enough. Thank you, Frank.
Mr. Chairman.
Ginny?
I'm not even sure.
Can I just
Yes.
People should know, we haven't closed the evidentiary portion of the hearing. What that means is additional testimony could come in. I was reluctant to do that because of all of the concerns that have been raised. So nobody should think, or listening, to the thousands of people who are watching this at home or will be watching this at home, we are not deliberating. The Board of Appeals is not deliberating. We're talking about the evidence that we've heard. So go ahead, Mrs. Kane, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure that I have information that I can count on as far as the plans go. It looks like the footprint is the same in the plans that we received tonight, and yet I'm hearing that that area is going to be enclosed for the stairway, covering where the stairway exists now. So this house could look amazingly different, and I'm wondering what it is that we're preserving then. So I'm not seeing that this is a compelling reason to change the zoning for this acre lot, so approximately acre lot. It's just too, it's too fuzzy. It's too fuzzy, and I don't know, and I honestly don't know that if, I'm not sure what more information would do for me, actually. It could make me say, well, you know, maybe this is going to be done tastefully. I'm not hearing that though from what the conversation has been tonight. So I don't know if, should we be looking at a little bit more of, do we want to go down this road, depending upon what these plans could be looking like at some point? Or do we want to say, in order for these plans to work enough to get a variance that is being sought, it would have to have how many conditions in it, and could those be met? I'm not sure if it makes sense for us to be looking at this on another night or not.
Because of the high bar that's been set? And the concerns that you have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a fair point. Let me add to that, and then we can, I agree with both of my colleagues.
I think I have some additional questions. I want to hear what you
Okay,
have to say.
first I
about
want
that.
to thank Mr. O'Donnell for coming and for sharing with us your expertise. And I'd like you to please pass that on to the Milton Historical Commission and let them know that we take your guidance seriously, and it's very much appreciated. I did hear from the applicant that notwithstanding anything that might happen here, they would be willing to commit to compliance with any, what I would say, contributing element, for lack of a better phrase, but I know that's the phrase they use in the register, with respect to the historical elements of the property that were listed in the Macris filing, which I think is significant. But I have 6 points, a couple of points I want to make to the owners, and a few to the applicant. The first is the point that's been made by both my colleagues with respect to the use of the variance for the condo conversion. It's a heavy play, right? We make our bones helping people to improve their properties by adding decks and putting porticos and improving properties, not by doing a condo conversion when we've got 4 pages of bylaw that really deal with detail that the planning board needs to see and that we don't have in front of us. So the first time nature of it is tricky for me, and I want to go slow because I could see this happening again, and I'm actually usually not, I'm not too concerned with precedent because all properties are unique, but the use of the variance process for a condo conversion is not unique, even though the property is unique. So let me just say that. The second is I agree with Frank on we need to know what's actually going to happen here. The third point is on historical compliance. I want to thank the applicant for making that commitment, and which I think is significant, and I noted that. And the fourth point to the applicant is, I think it's important to, if we are going to go down the road, and I acknowledge Mrs. King's point about whether we should. I think it's important to study the bylaw on the condo conversion and see how much of it can be complied with, notwithstanding the size of the lot. It could be, for example, that the bylaw was passed at a time when condominium conversions weren't common to properties in the estate area of Central Ave and Columbine Road and Hinckley Road, but may become more popular as we go on.
Mr. Chairman, if I could
Yeah.
just add to that point, I think I thought it was also a good point made by Mr. O'Donnell concerning the pressure in the town on these types of properties and the possibility of this being a tool from a historic preservation point of view. On the other hand, my concern is the decision to allow the use of this as such a tool, is that best left
meeting.
to town meeting and not to us on a moment-by-moment, property-by-property basis?
And Mr. Clark, I see you taking notes or listening intently. I think that's exactly right. I mean, the bylaw is here for us to enforce and to interpret, not to modify for our own
Make a whole new one.
uses. So it's a good question for town meeting. I have no idea what the answer is, but it's a fair question. So those are my 4 initial points. A couple of points to the abutters. So not only are they abutters, but they actually have an interest in the property. And that's pretty unique, you know. So, you know, they have uber standing here, it seems to me. And they've also testified about concerns that go to the nature of their interest in the property, and which is why I was inquiring about the nature of the rights. We didn't have much testimony on the rights, but I think it's important, and I think for the Tobins and the Smiths in particular, and I know the woman who lives at 143 across the street at Central Ave, or maybe 125, I don't know, but she was at the hearing.
Diane Labonte.
Labonte was at the hearing, and while she's in a butter, she doesn't have rights in the property, so I think that's important. And lastly, variance a high bar, and you know, Chapter 40, Section 10, from which Mr. Corcoran read, it's a pretty high standard. So this is something, given the particular testimony we've had from the 2 people that have rights in the property, has to be taken pretty seriously. So all of that adds up to me to I want more information. And I think really the question is whether or not we seek a continuance to try to gather that information and continue this dialogue, or whether we move to a vote. Now, you've got some sense of how the board is thinking about this. Each of us have weighed in, so unless the board has something more they want to add, I might put it to the applicant as to how they would wish to proceed right now, and then we can further deliberate that. I don't, Mrs. King, do you want to do that? You want to ask the applicant? You want me to ask the applicant?
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Mr. Tobin, do you want to be heard? I see you.
was just curious whether we had any standing to weigh in on getting a decision or not getting a decision. We are not an applicant, obviously.
We're happy to hear from you, Mr. Tobin, as an abutter.
Well, we are an abutter.
Please come to the microphone.
I was hoping to avoid that.
No, you have to, because we're.
I understand.
It's not for the room, it's for the cable TV.
It's for the large audience at home,
Yes.
yes.
Exactly.
Um,
You'd be shocked at how many people watch this. I am witness to that.
We'll all know why I wasn't at basketball practice. No, it would be nice to get some clarity, because there is concern. We have obvious concerns. There are concerns of others in the neighborhood. We have been curious about what the board felt about this. You called it aggressive. I think that's sort of how we viewed this development. And if we could get some finality that it's not going forward, that would be helpful. If it is going to continue, we have to look at our options. Perhaps we have to retain legal counsel, spend more time on this, which is not something we were looking to do if we can get the clarity here tonight. That's all I had.
Fair enough. I mean, you know, what you're hearing from the board, it's a balancing test, and having seen the property and recognizing its historic nature, nobody does want to see it lost, so, and, you know, to
Right.
Mr. O'Donnell's point, and that's what we're trying to, I feel like we need some more information, but I'd like to hear the applicant on this point. Mr. Corcoran.
I would agree with the chairman's position on that. We're happy to provide more information. The plans that I gave you tonight were plans that were developed a year ago, that were sort of ideas about how the property could be refurbished inside without more. And I think it became clear as they got into initial demolition that there was a lot more to it, associated with redeveloping inside and then demolishing and redeveloping inside, and what did that really mean? And where was and was there enough value there to do that? So the plans are not up to date. I'm not sure that we can bring a new set of plans, but I think we can think about sets of conditions. I think an interesting question was raised by at least Mrs. Smith with whether or not there's a two-family option. I don't know whether that two-family option would be acceptable to the neighbors. It's something I'd like to explore with them and the board as an option to 3. I do think that a conversion of some sort is reasonably necessary and is justified by the evidence. But I would ask the board if it would consider a continuance to a date comfortable for the board to come back, and then we'll come back with more specific information. I have offered, as I indicated earlier, to meet with the Tobins and the Smiths to specifically identify ways to enhance the protections that each property owner enjoys in the right-of-way. I think that's an important question. The Smiths have asked me specifically about it. For various reasons, we haven't been able to connect on that prior to this evening, but I think that's an important consideration, whether there's, what type of signage, whether, you prohibit certain types of vehicular traffic, whether any new traffic that might be a part of this development would only access the driveway for purposes of accessing Central Avenue and would forego future rights to access the balance of the private way out to Ruggles Lane. Those are, some of those are some thoughts that I have about how to address some of the questions. I think the very important questions have been asked. I appreciate the board's consideration of whether or not we ought to take more time. This is a unique animal. I spend a lot of time before the planning board. I spend a lot of time with unique situations, bringing them to town meeting. Town meeting is a difficult process to think about in terms of changing zoning. If you think about the notion of changing zoning to authorize conversions of historic houses or dwellings in the residence C and B districts, which currently really can't do, that opens up a Pandora's box of issues and questions of potentially unintended consequences, because all of a sudden, houses in other parts of, whether it's Milton Hill, Columbine Cliffs, East Milton, et cetera, and all of a sudden become subject to the bylaw. And no one would have had the opportunity to think about what the implications of that new bylaw would be before it would be enacted. I think it is appropriate to use the variance approach in this case because the property is unique and because this board perhaps adapting, and as part of my homework would be to look at more specifically the condominium conversion bylaw and adopting those elements of that bylaw that ought to be applicable in this case. But I think the variance approach is appropriate to use. Whether the board can get there at the end of the day is a question, and I understand that. But the ask is unusual, but I think the ask is appropriate.
Okay.
It's a difficult ask to make, but I think it's appropriate to make it.
I want to clarify that. I've never said, nor do I think, that it's not an appropriate ask. I think it's asking for a lot, but it's not an unreasonable or out of bounds request from a variance point of view, or we've had similar things usually in the special permit area, but I think one of the reasons why I in particular would like to see the continuance here is because I think there are legitimate concerns on the part of the neighborhood. It is a unique property. I think it's an appropriate, as I mentioned, use of the whole procedure that we have in place for granting relief from specific zoning provisions that may not work in each individual case because all properties are unique. On the other hand, I do think we need to go at a deliberate pace on this particular
I agree with that.
case.
Question on the floor, thank you, Frank. Question on the floor is, applicants asked for an extension. Mrs. King, do you have anything you want to say about that?
I'm not in favor of it. Unless something that was definitive came in, rather than yet another Plan B with 2 instead of 3. I don't want this to be a design review that we, let's make it fit, let's make it fit. One more is all I'll have, one more evening, that's it, that will be 3.
That's fine.
So you're hearing from the board, Mr. Tobin, let me address your comment. I hate continuances. And the reason I don't like them, and the board is reluctant to give them, is they tend to put pressure on the abutters to do something that they're not comfortable doing. But we have also told you that you're not just abutters, you're uber abutters, because you've got rights in the premises. And we've told you that it's a high bar to get a variance in this town, even though they're routinely granted. They are not routinely granted when they are opposed. And the reason for that is Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 10, sets a high bar. The reason why this case is intriguing is the historical nature of the property and the fairly unique character and the facts and circumstances we've got before us. So I am physically in the middle of my 2 colleagues, but I'm also in the middle on the determination of this. And notwithstanding the fact that ordinarily I would be pretty vociferously voting to not extend it and to dispense with the people's business in one hearing, I think this case is a little bit different. And I think we owe it to the neighbors to do so quickly, but I think we owe it to the applicant to hear them out. And I think we have a little bit of an incomplete application in that you've heard from each of the 3 members that we need to know definitively what's happening. And we told them that in the site visit. Mrs. Smith, do you have something you wanted to say?
I do. Whether Mr. Nash continues it on the property or he happens to sell it to someone and they say, we'd like to have some apartments in here, or we're going to wait the 9 months and then they'll tear it down and build 2 houses. Like, do we ever get a say again if those things ever happen?
Well, it depends, so they can do anything within the bounds of the town of Milton's bylaw, which includes the zoning bylaws, and within Commonwealth law. So they want to continue to use the property for a single-family premises, notwithstanding the fact that, as Frank pointed out, the building inspector could go up there and take a look, and there was a sink in the driveway or whatever it was. Yeah, you would certainly have a say over significant changes in the use of that property.
Okay.
I
The
can
variance will run with the land if it's granted, the other
speak
thing.
specifically.
Yes.
I think that if someone came back and asked to convert to a multifamily, they would absolutely it'd be back before you for the same purpose.
What's happening here is they're asking for the conversion to a multiple family with the addition that the multiple family be turned into ownership units, with the idea that that would be more in the character of the neighborhood. It's a little bit of a compromise, and
Yeah,
it
I
adds a
understand.
level of complexity because we've got a condominium conversion bylaw on this point, which doesn't apply. And it doesn't apply simply because of the size of the lot, but perhaps it should comply with respect to the balance of its provisions, which go on for 4 pages. So,
But with
It's a little bit
respect to the.
You could frankly, if this was a simple conversion to a multifamily, it's almost easy. It's almost easy. The part here that's intriguing and that gives us pause is conversion to a multifamily with conditions relative to a condominium. But that's at least the part that gives me pause and why I would favor getting more information from the applicant. Now, to build on what my chairman said, that's not a usual route for this board. We make decisions. This is a board that does not habitually continue cases, but we will continue cases when they're unique and potentially significant, which is, in my opinion, what this one is.
Thank you.
I would
You're
just in her
Mr. Corcoran.
response to her other question, whether they would have rights with respect to the historical commission. The Historical Commission does conduct a hearing upon an application for demolition, but their sole authority is to delay demolition for a period of 9 months from the date of that hearing. Beyond that, the demolition can happen, and the conversion to 2 lots can happen. It's a simple approval not required process with the planning board.
So the question comes to the board for an extension for, I would have to say a period not less than a month. Would you think?
Yeah.
Without prejudice, of course. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Reluctantly, aye.
Reluctantly, for the record, Mrs. King votes reluctantly aye, but there's nevertheless an aye. So we're going to continue this hearing for a period of not less than a month. Let me just clarify. And really specifically asking the applicant to make these plans definitive. You heard that from Mrs. King, and I think that's shared with the board. You've heard from the abutters about their concerns. I'd urge you to think about those, and certainly we'd invite the abutters back to retestify, to renew your testimony. And I want the abutters to know that we take this seriously and that I've heard you, and that this delay is in no way should be interpreted as not doing that. And it would normally be our practice to dispense of this in one hearing, but I think the greater good is to take another look at that. But notwithstanding that, I'll remind the applicant that the variance is a high bar, and that this is the first time we've been asked to do this, at least in the 15 or so years that the 3 members of this board have been sitting, and that goes back quite a ways. So, Mrs. Fitzgerald, when can we meet?
22nd or 23rd of February. Either that or we have to go into the second week of March. Unless you
23rd
want
is
to do it the week before that, but I'm thinking.
The 23rd is a planning board night,
Yes, it is.
and I know that they're in this room, and I know I have business before them that night.
How about the 22nd?
22nd's wide open.
22nd is
for me.
not good for me.
Okay.
See.
If,
Yeah, I can't do the 22nd.
okay. Do you want to do it the week before? We gotta do the.
It's that week, the 22nd.
About the 28th?
I can-
I won't be here, nor will Diane.
Where you going?
Dominican. With
Nice.
Diane. She's my backup.
They let you
What
both
are the
go.
dates?
So the other, he's gonna, Bill just went upstairs to.
March 1st?
I'll be away.
You'll be gone that week.
Yeah, I leave the 25th and I come back the 4th.
March 7th?
I gotta check the calendar, but Bill just went up to grab it. I don't know how it is with you guys, but
Mr. Nash, what's your pleasure?
Not a week.
Doesn't matter to you.
No, March 7th is fine. with me.
October 3rd. It's my birthday.
Oh, my nephew Matthew.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
March 7th in the evening's okay, assuming that I get back from New Orleans in time. So,
And you're
Okay.
flying back that day?
I'm flying back that day.
Oh, I don't know if that's a
is
good
there,
risk.
is there another date that week that would work for you guys after that?
The rest of that week works for me.
Okay.
March
Bill's getting the book, so
9th I
don't
could do.
know.
March 9th is a Thursday, Mr. Tobin, Mrs. Smith?
Should work.
Second and third, it's probably okay.
Mr. O'Donnell, would you want to come back?
If you'd like me back.
You're always welcome.
March 7th, looks like it's available.
March 7th?
7.
7, but that
That's the
meant-
day Frank's flying from New
That's,
Orleans?
yeah, that's the day I'm
March,
telling
and
you.
it's
March
March
9th
1st.
would be, probably be safer.
I think March 9th is a better idea.
Okay, we can fit in the Cronin, right?
March
Yeah.
9th is a Thursday night.
That usually works.
Planning board is that night as well.
I'll make it work.
Commission that night too?
Yes. No, Conservation Commission meets the second Tuesday of the month. Planning Board meets the second and fourth Thursday of the month.
Okay.
So we have it for the 9th at 7:30?
March 9th, 7th, this hearing is continued until March 9th at 7:30 in this room?
No, John Cronin
Up in the
upstairs.
John Cronin room on the second floor. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.